24 years ago, on a night when a blizzard swept through Interstate 80 in Nebraska, a middle-aged man suddenly vanished, leaving his family in profound grief and confusion. Authorities suspected it was either a case of abandonment or an accident, but no body was found, and the sparse clues quickly dissolved in the storm, leaving the investigation at a dead end. Yet, over 2 decades, those unwilling to accept the silence clung to the hope that the truth was still hidden somewhere. Then one day, when modern forensic technology re-examined evidence once thought meaningless, a forgotten detail unexpectedly emerged, shifting the entire direction of the investigation. Before diving into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you find the video helpful, don't forget to hit subscribe. On the night of December 15, 2001, a ferocious blizzard tore through Interstate 80 near Grand Island, Nebraska, turning the icy road into a blinding white expanse, with howling winds cutting through barren cornfields and a bone-chilling cold. Heavy trucks slowed to a crawl, their headlights dimly piercing the thick snow, while local drivers prayed to escape that deadly stretch of road. In this menacing scene, Daniel Harper, a 45-year-old small-time businessman from Grand Island, was driving his gray-green Ford Taurus home after a short business trip in Lincoln. Daniel was no stranger to the Midwest's harsh weather, but that night, with the sky pitch black, winds screaming relentlessly, and thick ice coating the windshield, an unsettling unease seemed to grip him. Around 10 p.m., a truck driver on the same route later reported seeing Daniel's car, with its hazard lights flashing frantically, glowing through the snow like a distress signal, before it veered off the lane and stopped on the shoulder. The warning lights continued to blink in the wind, but no one was seen stepping out. At the same time, a farmer living less than a mile from the highway reported hearing a loud bang echo through the stormy night, carried away by the gusts like the sound of a distant gunshot or homemade firecracker. Familiar with hunters, often out in winter, he paid it no mind. The next morning, when the snow briefly paused, highway patrol officers found the Ford Taurus still running, its hazard lights faintly flickering, the driver's door wide open, with Daniel's wallet, cell phone, and jacket left inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints in the thick snow around the car, just an endless cold white void. It was as if every trace of life had been erased by the blizzard in mere hours. The 45-year-old man vanished as if he had never existed, leaving behind a cold car, an engine humming steadily in the frosty haze, and a series of chilling questions. That morning, Nebraska fell into a deadly silence as news spread through Grand Island. Daniel Harper had been swallowed by the night and the blizzard, disappearing into the vast unknown, leaving behind a mystery that froze the entire community. And then, almost immediately, the Hall County Sheriff's Office launched a massive search to answer those chilling questions. On the morning of December 16, 2001, the entire stretch of Interstate 80, where Daniel's Ford Taurus was abandoned, was sealed off, with flashing red warning lights cutting through the thick snow and sirens blaring in the cold wind. Patrol teams set up mobile barriers, stopping traffic and turning miles of highway into a sprawling crime scene. In the gray sky above, a Nebraska State Patrol helicopter took off, its engines roaring as powerful searchlights swept over barren cornfields, snow-covered roadside trees, and the winding ice-crusted Platte River, coiled like a giant snake. The pilot circled, directing the beam into every dark corner, every distant rooftop, hoping to spot a human figure. On the ground, hundreds of volunteers from Grand Island, nearby small towns, and farmers who left their work behind gathered to help. Bundled in thick coats and scarves, they carried wooden sticks and flashlights, moving in lines across fields buried in snow. Each step sank into the powdery ice, leaving tracks that were quickly erased by whipping winds and falling snow. Some were tasked with checking roadside drainage ditches, others searched abandoned barns, while the rest scoured the frozen riverbank. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Everyone knew that in such brutal cold, a man couldn't survive long if he was still out there somewhere. Trained dogs were brought in from Lincoln, their noses pressed to the driver's seat of the Ford Taurus to catch a scent. At first, they barked loudly, darting like arrows through the snowy fields, but soon they stopped, circling and whimpering restlessly. The previous night's storm had dumped nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, obliterating all traces and rendering their keen senses useless. Handlers tugged at their leashes, patiently trying again, but the results remained the same. Nothing. The police also searched beneath the Platte River. They drilled large holes through the thick ice, lowering fiber-optic cameras into the freezing water flowing below. The screens showed shaky images, broken ice, drifting rotted logs, and an endless black void. No body, no shred of clothing, nothing to suggest Daniel had fallen in. The police also canvassed farms along the highway, knocking on doors and asking families if they'd seen a middle-aged man the previous night. The answers were mostly the same. They heard only the howling wind, the snow-pelting windows, and saw nothing but pitch-black darkness outside. For 3 consecutive days, the search continued at a relentless pace. Over 300 people, divided into groups, combed every inch of land in a grid pattern. At night, flashlight beams flickered like tiny sparks, battling a sea of snow. Police radios crackled with updates. Nothing found north of the field. No trace at the Platte River. The roadside woods are empty, a veteran officer remarked during a late-night briefing. We're chasing a ghost in a snowfield. By the 4th day, fierce winds stung faces, clothing soaked with sweat froze instantly, and many volunteers withdrew, exhausted. Some suffered hypothermia and were taken to temporary aid stations. Morale plummeted, and the silent, snow-covered fields became an obsession. Daniel Harper remained missing, with no sign of life or death. After nearly a week of scouring every corner within a dozen-mile radius, the Hall County Sheriff's Office had to admit defeat. Nebraska remained frigid, with storm winds whistling past roadside power poles, and the man was still gone. The mystery of Daniel Harper not only plunged his family into despair, but left the entire community in profound helplessness. A flesh-and-blood human could vanish completely in modern America, on one of Nebraska's busiest highways. As hope of finding him alive faded, investigators were forced to return to the only clue they had. The Ford Taurus left on Interstate 80. It became the sole silent witness to that blizzard night and was immediately towed to the State Patrol's garage in Grand Island for detailed forensic analysis. Every detail, from tiny stains on the floor mats to the fuel level, was meticulously examined. As in a traceless disappearance, the vehicle is often the only silent witness. Technicians began with the doors, no signs of forced entry, the handles unscratched, and the electronic lock functioning normally. The driver's door was wide open when found, while the other 3 were closed but unlocked, suggesting someone left the vehicle in a hurry or deliberately left the door open. The driver's seat was adjusted to Daniel's height. Nothing unusual, but the front passenger seat drew attention. Its surface bore an indentation, as if someone had sat there shortly before. An initial thermal scan was useless due to the car sitting overnight in freezing conditions, but the indentation was enough for investigators to note that night Daniel was not alone. The dashboard showed the gas tank was nearly half full, and the engine was running when found, indicating Harper had no intention of stopping due to low fuel. The tires were intact, not punctured, and the brakes worked fine, ruling out a sudden mechanical failure. The hazard lights had been manually activated and were still faintly glowing when the car was found, meaning someone turned them on just before leaving. The gear shift had sweat marks and an odd abrasion on the plastic, but fingerprints were unclear due to the slick surface and the engine running for hours. Even more unusual was the undercarriage. Soil samples, stuck to the tires and fenders, were compared to the ground where the car was found. Preliminary results showed they didn't match. The soil under the car was dark, clay-rich, mixed with small rock fragments, while the highway shoulder was mostly white gravel and thick snow. This strongly suggested the Taurus had been somewhere else before appearing at the scene. This was the first clue, hinting that the location where the car was found might not be where the incident actually occurred. In the trunk, police found a small travel bag with neatly folded clothes, a pair of dress shoes, and some work documents. All were dry and clean, indicating no sudden accident. Daniel's wallet and phone remained on the driver's seat, untouched, ruling out a typical robbery. A few tiny grains of sand on the passenger side floor mat didn't match the surrounding highway soil. Technicians preserved these for later comparison. Another detail caught the investigators' attention. The windshield had a thin 4-inch scratch, as if struck by a hard object. The scratch wasn't filled with snow, suggesting it occurred before the storm hit. Additionally, the passenger side door had a small brownish-red scuff, possibly paint from another vehicle. Together, these clues painted a vague but suspicious picture. Harper had a passenger, the Taurus had collided with another vehicle, and the scene where it was found wasn't necessarily the starting point of his disappearance. When the preliminary report was submitted, some veteran officers bluntly stated, "We're not just dealing with a disappearance in a storm. There's a human hand involved." However, the evidence was still too thin to pinpoint any specific suspect. Everything remained speculative, and the only certainty was the growing unease within the investigative team. For the first time since Daniel Harper vanished, clues suggested he might have fallen into a far darker situation than a mere accident. The findings from the Ford Taurus forced the Hall County Sheriff's Office to broaden their investigation to witnesses who had passed through Interstate 80 during that fateful blizzard night. They hoped that, however fragmented, their accounts could piece together a clear enough picture to illuminate what happened before Daniel Harper disappeared. The first witness interviewed was Robert Miller, a truck driver hauling freight from Denver to Omaha. He vividly recalled that around 10 p.m. was in near-zero visibility due to snow. He saw a Ford Taurus with its hazard lights flashing. "The lights were blinking like it was an emergency," Robert said. He slowed down, noticing through his rearview mirror that the car had stopped on the shoulder. What haunted him was glimpsing a figure in the passenger seat, faintly visible in the dim hazard lights and thick snow. Robert couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, only recalling a blurry shadow before the car faded into the storm. Another witness, Henry Lawson, a farmer living less than a mile from the highway, reported that around 10 p.m., while checking his livestock barn due to concerns about the snow collapsing the roof, he heard a loud bang echo through the wind. "It sounded more like a pistol than fireworks, but I thought it was kids messing around or hunters out late," Henry recalled. He didn't check outside due to the storm's intensity, but insisted the sound was unusual, coming from the highway's direction. This statement caught the police's attention, as it aligned with the later discovery of a bullet in skeletal remains. The third witness, Linda Chavez, a woman working the late shift at a Walmart in Grand Island, said she passed that stretch of road around 10:20 p.m. after checking the time on her car's clock while turning on the radio. She recalled briefly seeing two figures standing near a car stopped on the shoulder, one leaning against the passenger door, the other behind the rear of the vehicle. But with the snow falling heavily, she wasn't certain if she'd misseen. "I thought they were fixing the car, but it was odd because the door was wide open in that freezing weather," Linda said. When cross-referencing these accounts, the police noted several inconsistencies. Robert was certain the car was stopped by 10 p.m. with someone in the passenger seat, while Linda said she saw two figures outside the car around 10:20 p.m. If accurate, the time between these moments could be when Daniel vanished. But Robert saw no one outside. Linda was adamant there were people, and Henry heard the bang when Robert said the car stopped. The timeline didn't align, leaving investigators puzzled. Multiple rounds of questioning followed, but the witnesses stuck to their story. The storm that night was so intense, snow blanketing everything, winds howling, that human memory could easily blur. Some details might have been misjudged in timing or location, but it was also possible each witness saw a different moment of the same event. To test this, the police mapped the route, marking where Robert's truck passed, Henry's farm, and Linda's path. The results confirmed all three had reason to be there, and their accounts weren't fabricated. The issue was that they didn't form a coherent narrative. The lead investigator wrote in the report, "The accounts are like shards of a broken mirror, reflecting different images, but not fitting into a complete picture." The team tried to connect the dots. If the bang Henry heard was a gunshot, it happened as the car stopped, suggesting a serious incident inside. The figure Robert saw in the passenger seat could be a perpetrator or a companion of Daniel's. The two figures Linda saw outside could be the perpetrator cleaning up the scene, but no evidence was solid enough to confirm this. When parts of these accounts were released to local media, the community grew more anxious. Some believed Daniel was ambushed on the road. Others thought he picked up a dangerous hitchhiker. The police, while leaning toward human involvement, couldn't reconstruct exactly what happened that snowy night. Ultimately, all accounts were filed as unresolved clues. The case remained unanswered, leaving only questions about the abandoned car, the bang in the night, and the shadowy figures in the snow. After examining the Ford Taurus scene and collecting fragmented witness accounts, the Hall County Sheriff's Office realized they needed a new approach. If the blizzard had erased external clues, perhaps Daniel Harper's personal life could reveal hidden secrets. A team was tasked with focusing entirely on his personal and financial background, hoping to uncover a motive or someone with the means to harm him. Bank statements, loan records, and credit contracts quickly painted a complex picture. Daniel was nearly $80,000 in debt, mostly from loans to sustain his small construction supply store in Grand Island, plus unpaid credit card bills. With an unstable income, financial pressure had weighed heavily on him for years before his disappearance. Yet investigators noticed something odd. Typically, in adult disappearance cases, police consider the possibility of someone fleeing debt. But with Daniel, there was no evidence he planned to vanish. His passport remained unused in a drawer at home. His bank accounts showed no unusual transactions before he went missing. His credit cards stopped being used the night of December 15, 2001, with no cash withdrawals. This suggested Daniel hadn't planned to flee. He was living normally until he disappeared. Digging deeper into his family life, investigators uncovered a tense conflict. His wife, Susan Harper, 42, had repeatedly argued about selling a piece of inherited land on the outskirts of Grand Island. Daniel fiercely opposed it, viewing the land as a family legacy, while Susan wanted to sell it to pay off debts and start anew. Neighbors reported hearing heated arguments between the couple, especially in the weeks leading up to late 2001. A close friend of Susan's revealed she had complained that if it weren't for Daniel's debts, things would be different. These details caught investigators' attention, as financial disputes often fuel motives in family-related crimes. However, there was no evidence Daniel was preparing to leave his family. He went to work regularly, attended church on Sundays, and his teenage sons recalled him giving them school advice and promising to take them to a high school football game the next week. If he intended to flee, he wouldn't have made such promises. The police also examined his life insurance policy, valued at $250,000, with Susan as the beneficiary. This wasn't unusual, but given his disappearance, it raised flags for further scrutiny. They also reviewed his business dealings. Daniel had worked with a few partners on small ventures, but none were suspicious. They all lost money but showed no signs of resentment. His biggest creditors were a local bank and a credit card company, entities unlikely to resort to violence over disputes. Another point of interest was Daniel's character. He wasn't one to give up. Despite his store's struggles, he persisted, hoping to turn things around. Friends described him as someone who sticks it out to the end, with no signs of mental breakdown. His medical records showed no history of depression or behavioral disorders. This further supported the theory that he didn't leave voluntarily. An internal report submitted in early 2002 noted Harper was heavily in debt, but showed no signs of planning to flee or preparing for it. Family conflicts and the life insurance policy warrant closer scrutiny. Yet without a body or direct evidence, these details remained circumstantial. Investigators had to keep the case open, but were unable to move forward. At this point, the Harper case began to take on a gray hue. Debt, marital strife, and a life insurance policy suggested he might have been the victim of a plot or violent act. But without solid evidence, all theories remained speculative. The case was slipping into a dead end, though Daniel's life revealed one clear truth: he didn't disappear to escape. More likely, someone forced him out of his life. After months of grappling with sparse clues from the abandoned car, disjointed witness accounts, and Daniel Harper's conflicting financial picture, the Hall County Sheriff's Office hit a wall. Every initial lead, whether Daniel fled his debts, was ambushed on the highway, or fell victim to a family-related crime, lacked sufficient evidence to hold up. Soil samples from the car's undercarriage couldn't be deeply analyzed with 2001 technology, faint fingerprints couldn't be identified, and witnesses stuck to their conflicting timelines. A year passed, and case briefings grew shorter, with seasoned investigators showing signs of resigned frustration. In December 2002, a year after Daniel's disappearance, the case was officially shelved. An internal Nebraska State Patrol memo stated, "No new leads, insufficient grounds for prosecution." The Harper file is moved to cold case status. The Harper family received notice that Daniel was declared missing under Nebraska law, allowing Susan to handle civil matters like life insurance, shared assets, and custody of their 2 sons. For the police, it was a temporary pause, but for the family and Grand Island community, it felt like a gaping wound stitched shut without being cleaned. Declaring him missing didn't mean everyone believed Daniel was dead. Some in the community whispered he might have started a new life far away. Others insisted he was murdered, but the killer was too clever to leave traces. The family was divided. Susan tried to move on, collecting the insurance money and raising their sons, while some of Daniel's relatives hinted his death involved someone close. These rumors made the Harper case infamous, dubbed by local media as one of Nebraska's greatest mysteries of the early 21st century. In the Hall County Sheriff's Office archives, the Harper file grew thick with hundreds of pages of reports, interview transcripts, scene photos, route maps, and financial documents. New officers were often taught the case as an example of how a disappearance can become a labyrinth, how a blizzard can erase clues in hours. A veteran detective noted in his personal journal, "The Harper case is a stark reminder of nature's cruelty and human limitations." In 2003, when Susan received the full life insurance payout, public scrutiny surged. Though police had no evidence to charge her, neighbors gossiped that she accepted her husband's disappearance too quickly. Some articles questioned whether the Harper case was a hidden family crime the police overlooked. But the buzz eventually faded. Nebraska moved into the new decade with fresh cases, and Daniel Harper's name became a faint echo in vague conversations. Still, for law enforcement, the Harper file was never truly forgotten. It sat in Lincoln's cold case archives, marked in red as special due to its enigmatic nature: a middle-aged man, no signs of planning to flee, no body, no weapon, no reliable witnesses. Only the car remained as evidence, but it held contradictions yet to be resolved. As new investigative technologies emerged, from advanced DNA analysis to automated ballistics matching, the file remained untouched. Young investigators were told of the Harper case as a cautionary tale: not every case finds answers, and sometimes the truth lies buried under decades of cold snow. 10 years after that horrific blizzard night, Daniel Harper's name had faded into a dim memory for the public. But in the Nebraska State Patrol's archives, the red-labeled Harper Missing Person 2001 file sat waiting for a chance to be reopened. In 2011, that chance arrived. As Nebraska launched a project to re-examine old evidence with modern forensic technology, Daniel's Ford Taurus was re-inspected. In the initial 2001 examination, technicians collected paint chips from the car's body and door, but limited equipment couldn't identify their source. Now, with X-ray fluorescent spectroscopy and an expanded vehicle paint database, the results stunned investigators The brownish-red paint on the passenger door and windshield didn't belong to the Ford Taurus. It matched the paint used on Chevy Silverado pickup trucks, models from 2000 to 2002. This discovery instantly breathed new life into a case long thought dead. Seasoned detectives, upon hearing the report, sighed with regret. If we had this technology in 2001, things might have turned out differently. For the first time, they had physical evidence indicating that Daniel's car had collided or come into direct contact with another vehicle on the night he vanished. This clue reshaped the entire picture. If it was a voluntary disappearance, why was there foreign paint on the car? If it was just an accident, why didn't the other party report it, leaving Harper to disappear without a trace? The investigative team launched a comprehensive review. They sent requests to the Nebraska DMV and neighboring states, filtering registration data for all 2000-2002 Silverado models. Hundreds of vehicles appeared on the list, spanning from Grand Island to Omaha. Some were still in use, others had been sold multiple times, and some had been dismantled in junkyards. Investigators fanned out, knocking on owners' doors, taking photos, and collecting paint samples for comparison. But the deeper they dug, the more disappointed they became. Most of the surviving Silverados showed no matching signs. Others had been repainted, changed owners, or were completely destroyed. The investigation expanded to the areas around Grand Island, with police even checking records of minor accidents from 2001, 2002, hoping to find a report of a Silverado with corresponding scratches. But the records revealed nothing suspicious. 10 years was enough to erase all traces. Junkyards had been cleared. Owners had replaced vehicles, and the Silverados once on the road now existed only on paper. However, the discovery still held value. It confirmed that Daniel's disappearance couldn't be explained solely by natural elements. Another vehicle was present that night, possibly blocking Daniel's car, or at least at the scene. The question arose, who was driving the Silverado, and what was its role in the disappearance? Detectives noted in an internal report, this clue proves human intervention. The Harper case is not just a simple disappearance. Although the mysterious Silverado's owner wasn't found, this new detail elevated the Harper case to a priority during cold case unit meetings. It also prompted younger detectives, who only knew Harper through old files, to ask more questions. Had Daniel met someone on his way home? Were the family disputes and mounting debts connected to that pickup truck? The year 2011 ended without a final resolution, but the paint discovery was considered a turning point. It not only kept the Harper case alive in the investigative community, but also stirred renewed buzz in Nebraska when local media reported, Daniel Harper's car shows signs of a collision with a Chevy Silverado. The news rekindled long-dormant discussions. But as before, when no further progress emerged, the excitement faded. The Harper case remained in limbo, a cold case with a critical clue, but not enough to bring the truth to light. The real breakthrough came years later. After local media in 2011 reported the foreign paint on the Ford Taurus, the Harper case resurfaced from dusty files. But, as usual, public attention quickly waned without new developments. The Daniel Harper file returned to cold case status, buried among hundreds of unsolved disappearances in Nebraska. It wasn't until 2019, when the state's Department of Justice established a dedicated cold case unit, that a real opportunity emerged. The unit was formed to reinvestigate decades-old cases using modern forensic technology unavailable at the time of the initial investigations. One of the first files on their desk was the Harper case, a mystery that had haunted Nebraska for nearly 2 decades. The case was assigned to Detective Laura Simmons, a 36-year-old investigator with 8 years of experience in Lincoln, known for her patience and meticulous analysis. Upon receiving the nearly 4-inch thick file, Simmons spent weeks reading every report, transcript, scene photo, route map, and witness statement from start to finish. This thorough review revealed blind spots that earlier investigators had to overlook due to technological limitation. First was Susan Harper's testimony, Daniel's wife. In her 2001 statement, Susan claimed she was home all evening, watching their 2 sons, and never left the house. But Simmons noticed the file lacked independent witnesses to corroborate this. The boys were too young at the time, their statements vague. Comparing this to neighbors' accounts that they heard arguing from the Harper house that night, Simmons raised a major question. If Susan was truly home all evening, why did the arguing coincide with the time Daniel vanished? Moreover, upon close reading, Simmons found Susan had changed small details in two separate interviews, once saying she went to bed at 9 p.m. Another time claiming she was reading until nearly 10 p.m. These minor inconsistencies might have been overlooked initially, but in a cold case, they became critical. The second blind spot Simmons focused on was the soil sample. In 2001, technicians noted the soil under Daniel's car didn't match the highway shoulder where it was found, but no detailed mineral analysis or comparisons to other areas were done. Simmons knew modern soil analysis could identify chemical and mineral compositions with high precision, potentially pinpointing the geographic area where the soil originated. In a case where the car might have been moved, this soil could be a vital clue. Additionally, Simmons noted that the 2001 file barely explored Daniel's cell phone, found in the car. Call logs and contacts were only superficially recorded due to limited data extraction technology at the time. By 2019, new methods could recover deleted data from old SIM cards. Simmons flagged this as a priority for the reopened case. Presenting to the cold case unit, Simmons argued that the Harper case wasn't just a mysterious disappearance caused by a blizzard, but a cleverly concealed murder. We have a man in debt, vanishing under strange circumstances, a wife with inconsistent statements, foreign paint on his car, and unanalyzed soil samples. This isn't about where Daniel went anymore, it's about who made Daniel disappear, Simmons emphasized. With her superior's approval, the Harper file was officially reopened in August 2019. Old evidence was retrieved from storage and sent to the state's modern lab. For the first time in 18 years, the Harper case was no longer a forgotten name in a cold file cabinet. Simmons knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but she also understood that every old detail, when viewed through new technology, could become a crucial piece of the puzzle. And for the Harper case, those pieces were starting to take shape. When the Harper file was reopened in 2019, Detective Laura Simmons knew that solving it couldn't rely solely on old papers and scattered reports. She needed a true breakthrough, a tangible new piece of evidence strong enough to pull the case out of the fog. But Simmons couldn't have anticipated that this breakthrough would come from a completely chance event 2 years later. In April 2021, at a small farm about 15 miles north of Grand Island, farmer Mark Ellison began a project to build a new livestock barn. It was a spring day, the ground freshly thawed, and a heavy excavator was brought in to dig deep foundations. As the bucket scooped through the hard soil, Mark noticed something unearthed among the dirt. At first he thought it was an old log, but when sunlight hit it, the object gleamed pale white. He approached, and his heart raced. It was a human bone fragment. Alongside it, Mark found a warped, rusted piece of metal resembling a bullet casing. Panicked, Mark immediately called the Hall County Sheriff's Office. Within an hour, the site was sealed off as a crime scene, with patrol cars, yellow tape, and forensic experts in white hazmat suits. Detective Simmons arrived that afternoon, and upon seeing the bone and metal fragment, she knew her 2019 instincts were correct. Daniel Harper didn't leave, he was killed, and his body was hidden in an unexpected place. In the following days, a large-scale excavation was conducted. The forensic team dug carefully, sifting through each layer of soil. Gradually, they uncovered more bones, an arm, ribs, and then a skull with a clear bullet hole. All fragments were collected, numbered, and placed in specialized bags. Even more significant was a distorted bullet lodged in wet clay. Though deformed after nearly 2 decades, its rifling marks were intact enough for ballistics comparison. The discovery quickly spread through the community. News of human remains found from a man missing since 2001 dominated local headlines. Grand Island residents, long accustomed to hearing Daniel Harper's name as a cold case shadow, were stunned to learn he had been murdered. For the police, The excavation wasn't just new evidence, it was undeniable confirmation. This was a homicide, no longer just a mysterious disappearance. The bone samples were sent to the state's DNA lab. Within weeks, results confirmed a complete genetic match with Daniel's two sons, verifying the remains as his. When the report reached the cold case unit, Simmons sat silently for minutes, staring at the words positive match. After nearly 20 years, Daniel Harper was officially confirmed dead. Concurrently, investigators surveyed the burial site further. They noted it was just a few miles from Interstate 80, on land owned by the Harper family in the early 2000s before being sold. This immediately shifted suspicion toward Susan Harper, who had lived for 2 decades as the grieving widow. Simmons noted in her report, "It's highly likely the body was buried shortly after Daniel's disappearance, in a location Susan could easily access." The discovery also opened opportunities to explore supporting evidence. Soil from the burial site was sampled and matched the mineral composition of the soil found under the Ford Taurus in 2001. After nearly 20 years, the connection was clear. The car had been at the burial site before being moved to the highway to stage a false scene. With these findings, the Harper file transformed completely. From a vague disappearance, it became a murder case with a victim, a crime scene, and a potential murder weapon. DNA confirmed the identity, forensics proved the cause of death, and evidence of staging was undeniable. In her summary report to the cold case unit, Simmons wrote, "All the scattered pieces finally fit. Daniel Harper didn't vanish, he was killed, and the killer has lived among us for 20 years." In the days following the excavation of Daniel Harper's remains, the Nebraska State Forensic Lab became the investigation's epicenter. Forensic experts were urgently mobilized, including Dr. Harold Green, who had worked on several high-profile Midwest homicide cases. He and his team began reconstructing the story held silent in the bones for nearly 2 decades. The fragments were carefully cleaned and laid out on a gleaming stainless steel table under cold fluorescent lights. The reassembled skull revealed a neat, circular hole in the left temple. Cracks radiated like a spider web from the bullet hole, confirming the projectile entered at high velocity, causing an instantly fatal injury. Dr. Green used calipers and a digital camera to document every detail, concluding preliminarily that the bullet matched a .38 caliber, a common handgun round in Nebraska households at the time. Notably, the bullet's trajectory, left to right, front to back, at close range, suggested a face-to-face encounter. This wasn't an accident or a stray shot from afar, Green emphasized in his report. Beyond the skull, the forensic team found other injuries. The right arm bone had a diagonal fracture, not from burial or decomposition, but from a forceful impact while the victim was alive. Microscopic analysis confirmed the break occurred at the time of death. Experts hypothesized Daniel used his right arm to defend or struggle before being shot, indicating a brief altercation with the killer. The rib bones also showed damage, a small crack in the 7th right rib. While not conclusive, it supported the possibility of a forceful attack before the fatal shot. Combined, these details debunked any accident or voluntary disappearance theories. This was a deliberate murder, with violence occurring just before death. Parallel to the bone analysis, the forensic team examined the distorted bullet found in the soil. Using a comparison microscope, they identified distinct rifling marks from the gun barrel. The results confirmed it was a .38 special round, commonly used with Smith & Wesson revolvers, the same type Susan Harper had registered and later reported lost in 2002. While not enough to charge her immediately, this coincidence shifted the investigation's focus sharply toward the wife. To ensure accuracy, the forensic team compared soil from the bone crevices and burial site. The mineral composition, pH and clay content matched perfectly, confirming Daniel was shot and buried at the discovery site, not moved years later. The death occurred near the time of his 2001 disappearance, leaving no room for alternative theories. The final forensic report, submitted to the cold case unit in late May 2021, outlined 3 key conclusions. The victim died from a .38 caliber bullet through the skull. There was evidence of a struggle via the arm fracture, and this was a homicide, not an accident or voluntary disappearance. Reading those words, Detective Laura Simmons knew a new phase had begun. After nearly 20 years, the truth had emerged from the cold soil, and Daniel Harper's voice was restored through undeniable evidence. When the forensic report was delivered in late May 2021, Detective Laura Simmons understood the case couldn't stop at confirming Daniel Harper died from a gunshot. The next step was to revisit the starting point of 2001, re-examining all statements, especially from those closest to Daniel. Among them, Susan Harper, the wife who had lived as a grieving widow for 2 decades, emerged as the central figure. Old records noted that after Daniel's disappearance, Susan told police she was home all evening, watching their sons, and didn't leave the house, only learning of the tragedy when police knocked the next morning. But when Simmons compared the 2001 statement to neighbors' accounts, gaps appeared. The Johnson family, living a few hundred meters from the Harpers, recalled that stormy night vividly, hearing loud arguing from the Harper house around 9:45 p.m. The noise lasted a few minutes before falling silent. They didn't venture out due to the fierce winds, but confirmed the detail. In the original 2001 file, this was noted briefly and dismissed, as police lacked evidence to pursue it. Simmons knew that with the new forensic findings, this testimony carried entirely new weight. When Susan was called to the cold case unit in Lincoln for re-interview, she appeared calm, as if accustomed to repeated questioning over the years. But when Simmons pressed for details about that night, where she was, what she did, whether the kids were asleep, Susan grew hesitant. This time, she said she was reading until nearly 10 p.m. Contradicting her earlier claim of going to bed at 9 p.m., when Simmons pointed out the inconsistency, Susan gave an awkward laugh. "It's been 20 years, I don't remember exactly." To a seasoned investigator, that response only deepened suspicion. Simmons cross-checked other statements. Another neighbor, Alice Monroe, said that around 10 p.m. that night, while checking her livestock barn door, she heard a loud noise like a gunshot carried by the wind. She reported this in 2001, but police logged it as an unidentified sound. Now, with the discovery of the .38 bullet in Daniel's skull, Monroe's account became a perfectly fitting piece. Simmons compiled a timeline, 9:45 p.m. Neighbors hear arguing, 10 p.m. a gunshot-like sound, 10:15 p.m. Daniel's car is seen with hazard lights on the highway. Placing these events together, Simmons saw a scenario. Daniel argued with his wife at home, was shot, and his body was buried. The car was moved to the highway to stage a false scene. In a second interview, Simmons asked Susan to explain the .38 handgun she once registered. Susan claimed it was lost in 2002, unsure of the circumstances. But the lost firearm report showed she only reported it months after Daniel's disappearance, a suspiciously timed detail. When Simmons showed her a photo of the distorted bullet found with the remains, Susan paused for a long moment before saying, "I don't know, I had nothing to do with his death." The mounting inconsistencies turned Susan from a grieving widow into the primary suspect. Simmons wrote in an internal report, "Susan Harper's statements are not only inconsistent, but directly contradict witnesses. Combined with forensic evidence, there is strong reason to suspect her direct involvement in Daniel's death." By revisiting the entire file, Simmons clarified what police couldn't prove 19 years earlier. Susan's account didn't align with what happened that blizzard night. If earlier theories led to dead ends, these contradictions now pointed straight to the truth. With Susan Harper's inconsistencies exposed, Detective Laura Simmons knew the next key lay in the .38 handgun. Susan had legally registered, in the old file, the brief note reported lost in 2002 was treated as a minor administrative detail, barely noticed. But with the forensic finding that the bullet through Daniel's skull was a .38 special, this detail became a thread potentially leading to the killer. Simmons requested the Nebraska State Patrol's archives team to retrieve all civilian firearm records from 1995, 2005. After days of searching, they recovered Susan's 1999 gun purchase permit from Arms and Ammo in Lincoln, documenting a short-barreled Smith & Wesson revolver using .38 special rounds. Simmons personally visited the county courthouse archives to review Susan's August 2002 lost firearm report, filed 8 months after Daniel's disappearance. In it, Susan wrote the gun was misplaced during a shed cleanup, with no specific date. The information was so vague that police at the time simply filed it away. Comparing the two facts, husband vanishes in December 2001, gun lost in August 2002, Simmons couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. Investigators contacted Arms and Ammo, still in business. The owner vaguely recalled Susan buying the gun with a friend, noting she seemed uneasy when staff explained its use. She didn't seem like a gun enthusiast, more like she bought it for a personal reason, he said. The sales record included the gun's serial number, which Simmons entered into a federal database to check for matches. Though no definitive results came back, the fact that Susan owned a gun matching the bullet in Daniel's skull significantly bolstered the case against her. The forensic team also re-examined the distorted bullet found at the burial site. Under a microscope, they confirmed the rifling marks matched those of a Smith & Wesson barrel, while the exact gun couldn't be identified since the weapon was never recovered. The match was too significant to ignore. Simmons wrote in her report, "The likelihood that the bullet was fired from the gun registered to Susan Harper is extremely high." During re-interviews, Simmons skillfully probed about the gun. At first, Susan repeated her old story, "It's gone, I don't know where." But when Simmons presented the 1999 gun purchase permit and the 2002 lost firearm report, Susan grew visibly tense. When asked why she waited 8 months to report it missing, she offered no convincing reason. "I thought it was just misplaced somewhere. I only reported it after not finding it while cleaning the shed," she said. But Simmons noted her evasive gaze in detail. The truth was emerging. Daniel Harper was shot with a .38 special bullet. Susan had owned such a gun. The gun disappeared around the time her husband vanished, and the bullet in his bones bore rifling marks matching that gun type. The pieces were falling into place. Simmons knew she couldn't yet charge Susan based solely on these coincidences. But to the investigative team, Susan Harper was no longer the grieving widow. She was the prime suspect in a case of killing her husband, burying his body, and staging a false scene on Interstate 80. In July 2021, with forensic evidence, witness statements, and firearm records forming a clear picture, Detective Laura Simmons and the Cold Case Unit decided to enter the toughest phase, confronting Susan Harper directly. After 2 decades as a tragic widow in the public eye, she was now the central figure in a murder investigation. A summons was issued, and on a sweltering morning in Lincoln, Susan entered the interrogation room, thin, with graying hair tied back, her eyes a mix of defiance and anxiety. Simmons began calmly, without rushing. "Miss Harper, we need your help to clarify some inconsistencies in the file. This is your chance to tell the story as you remember it." On the table, Simmons laid out photos: Daniel's skull with a neat bullet hole, the distorted bullet from the burial site, the brownish-red paint on the Ford Taurus's door, and Susan's 2002 lost firearm report for the .38 gun. Susan's eyes flickered briefly, but she tried to maintain composure. Initially, she stuck to her old narrative. She was home that evening, reading, then went to bed, never leaving the house. But Simmons countered with the Johnsons' new testimony. They heard loud arguing from the Harper house at 9:45 p.m., the same time Daniel disappeared. Susan paused, then suggested it might have been a loud discussion, but not serious. Within minutes, her first statement began to crumble. When Simmons shifted to the .38 gun, Susan's unease became evident. She first claimed the gun was lost before Daniel's disappearance, but when Simmons placed the 2002 lost firearm report on the table, she backtracked to, "Maybe I misremembered, I'm not sure when it went missing." Asked why she waited 8 months to report it, Susan faltered, "I thought it was just misplaced in the shed." These evasive answers were meticulously noted by Simmons, as each shift was a critical indicator. Next, Simmons presented the forensic report. The bullet in Daniel's skull was a .38 special, the same type as Susan's gun. "Do you know how slim the chance is that this is just a coincidence?" Simmons asked directly. Susan looked down, avoiding eye contact, her hands gripping the chair's edge. She began repeating, "I didn't shoot him, I didn't kill my husband." But moments later she added, "What if someone took the gun from my house? What if I was set up?" For the first time in 20 years, Susan indirectly acknowledged the weapon's potential link to her. Simmons pressed on about the foreign paint on the Ford Taurus. Daniel's car had scratches matching a 2002 Chevy Silverado. "We're looking for that truck. But you know, in a small community, most Silverado drivers back then knew each other. Can you explain why his car had that paint?" Susan frowned briefly, then deflected. "I don't know, he was working, maybe he hit something." But this only heightened the tension in the room. For 3 hours, Simmons and her partner took turns probing, patiently exposing each inconsistency between Susan's old and new statements. She initially denied any involvement, then admitted to a loud argument that night, and later claimed she couldn't recall details. When confronted directly about the gunshot, she broke down saying, "I just wanted it all to end. I put up with him for too long, but I didn't mean to kill him." That was the moment Simmons had been waiting for, half confession, half justification. In an internal report after the interrogation, Simmons wrote, "Susan Harper wavered significantly when faced with evidence. Her statements shifted repeatedly, from complete denial admitting an argument, vague references to the gun implying marital strain. This is typical behavior of a suspect when the noose tightens." The police didn't arrest her immediately. They needed more physical evidence to ensure a solid charge. But after that interrogation, no one in the cold case unit doubted. Susan Harper knew more than she had admitted for 20 years. For the first time, the grieving widow appeared as a woman capable of concealing a crime. After the tense interrogation of Susan Harper, the cold case unit knew they needed an undeniable scientific piece to turn suspicion into a formal charge. Though Susan wavered and changed her story multiple times, the law required clear physical evidence. So, Detective Laura Simmons sent the distorted bullet from Daniel's skull to the FBI's ballistics lab in Quantico, home to the nation's most advanced firearms database and comparison technology. Federal experts began by using an electron comparison microscope to analyze the rifling marks on the .38 special bullet. Despite being deformed after 20 years in the soil, the bullet retained distinct microstriations from the gun barrel. A 3D laser scanner reconstructed the bullet's surface, magnifying each groove, and compared it to thousands of barrel patterns in the national database. The results were stunning. The rifling marks matched a short-barreled Smith & Wesson .38 revolver, the exact model Susan registered in 1999. The FBI technicians wrote in their report, "The match is highly precise, not attributable to chance. This is almost certainly a bullet fired from the Smith & Wesson registered to Susan Harper." Simmons received the report on a September 2021 morning. She read each bolded line, her heart racing. For the first time in 2 decades, they had concrete, rigorous scientific evidence, no longer reliant on speculation or inconsistent statements. The bullet in Daniel's skull and Susan's gun, the 2 pieces had perfectly aligned. When the findings were presented at a cold case unit meeting, the room grew thick with tension. A veteran officer exclaimed, "That's it, she has no way out." Indeed, no matter how Susan denied or justified, the FBI's ballistics results were strong enough to hold up in any court. This was no longer suspicion. It was direct evidence linking her to her husband's death. Immediately, Simmons and Hall County prosecutors began building the case. They combined the forensic report on the skull's bullet hole, the arm fracture indicating a struggle, the soil match from the burial site, witness accounts of arguing and a gunshot, and Susan's suspicious lost firearm report. But above all, the bullet's rifling match was the decisive piece, scientific evidence that couldn't be refuted. In an internal report, Simmons wrote, "This ballistics finding is the critical turning point. It turns hypothesis into fact, suspect into defendant. There is no doubt Susan Harper's gun took Daniel Harper's life on that blizzard night in 2001. From here, the investigation entered a new phase, preparing an arrest warrant, bringing the Harper case into the light after nearly 2 decades of cold silence. And it all began with a single bullet, lying silent in the earth through countless snowy seasons. After the FBI's ballistics report confirmed the bullet in Daniel Harper's skull matched the .38 gun Susan had registered, Detective Laura Simmons and the Hall County prosecutors knew they had undeniable physical evidence. But to convince a jury and the public that Susan not only shot her husband but had a clear motive, they had to prove a core element: financial gain. A murder case often only holds up in court when prosecutors can clearly answer why. The financial investigation team began reviewing Susan's bank records from 2001 to 2005. What they found quickly clarified the picture. Just months after Daniel was declared missing and the case officially closed in late 2002, Susan completed the process to claim a $250,000 life insurance payout. Records from Norwich Life Insurance confirmed she was the sole beneficiary, with the funds disbursed in April 2003. Shortly after, her bank account showed a massive deposit far exceeding any prior transactions. Simmons and investigators also discovered that within 6 months of receiving the money, Susan used over $90,000 to pay off the mortgage on their Grand Island home and deposited over $50,000 into a joint investment account with her sister. A series of large purchases followed, from a new car to short vacations in Colorado. These stood out starkly against Daniel's dire financial state before his disappearance: over $80,000 in debt, a failing construction supply store, and maxed-out credit cards. Hall County's lead prosecutor, Margaret O'Connell, reviewed the file and stated, "We have a clear motive. Susan Harper directly benefited from her husband's death, with an amount large enough to completely transform her financial situation." O'Connell noted that Susan's waiting until Daniel was declared missing to file the insurance claim suggested a calculated plan. No one could be that coincidental. To strengthen the case, Simmons found evidence that Susan called the insurance company just a week after the case was closed. An internal note from a Norwich Life employee read, "Client inquired about claim procedures for a missing person." This became a critical piece, showing Susan had been preparing to collect the money well in advance. Financial experts were brought in to analyze. They charted Susan's situation before and after the payout, from drowning in debt and scraping by on monthly payments to financial freedom, clearing all loans with money left to invest. The insurance money transformed her economic life. This is a classic financial motive for murder, one expert concluded. Simmons wrote in her report, "It's not just family conflict or personal disputes, but a clear economic benefit. Daniel's death freed Susan from a mountain of debt and gave her $250,000. This motive is too direct to ignore." In prosecution planning meetings, O'Connell outlined the strategy at trial. They would portray Daniel as a man desperate under debt, but still holding on, and Susan as someone who saw an opportunity to resolve everything with a single shot. She not only escaped a contentious marriage, but stepped into a new life with financial freedom. This was the money story, one juries typically find compelling and hard to refute. A detail bolstering this theory was the timing of Susan's 2002 lost firearm report, filed just before she began the insurance claim process. Gun gone, husband missing, insurance paid, 3 pieces chillingly aligned. In the final meeting before drafting the indictment, Simmons concluded, "We have the body, the bullet, the gun, the inconsistent statements, and now the financial motive. It's complete. Susan Harper is no longer a widow. She's a murder suspect who killed for insurance money. With this decision, prosecutors began preparing the arrest warrant. The Harper case, frozen for nearly 2 decades, was now erupting into a phase where all secrets would be exposed, and Susan would face not just the truth, but justice. After the financial records revealed Susan Harper's clear motive, the cold case unit pursued another overlooked piece from 2 decades prior: soil. In 2001, forensic technicians collected Daniel's clothing from the car's trunk, but soil analysis then was limited to basic color and mineral comparisons. The report only noted, "does not match the soil on the Interstate 80 shoulder." When Simmons reopened the case, she knew 2021 soil analysis could map minerals with extreme precision, potentially pinpointing an area to a few square meters. Soil traces on Daniel's right pant leg, a gray-brown residue, were analyzed. The lab separated particles, conducted spectrometry, and compared them to stored soil samples. The results were stunning. The soil not only differed from the highway shoulder, but matched nearly perfectly with the soil in the Harper family's backyard in Grand Island. The ratio of feldspar, kaolinite clay, and rare manganese oxide particles formed a unique geological signature. When Simmons received the report, she went silent for a moment. This evidence was tantamount to a confession from the scene. Daniel Harper didn't vanish on the highway. He was shot in his own home, and his body was moved and buried miles away. The reconstructed scene was vivid. On that blizzard night, after a heated argument, a .38 gunshot rang out in the darkened house. Daniel collapsed, his clothes stained with backyard soil. The killer then moved the body, buried it hastily, and staged the Ford Taurus on the Interstate 80 shoulder. Prosecutor Margaret O'Connell immediately saw this as pivotal evidence. "We've connected the start and end," she said in a meeting. "The bullet in the victim's head, the suspect's gun, and now the suspect's backyard soil on the victim's clothes. There's no other explanation." To solidify this, Simmons collected current soil samples from the Harper backyard, despite nearly 20 years passing. Comparisons showed near-perfect consistency. Experts confirmed this match couldn't be coincidental. The backyard soil was unique to that specific area within a few hundred meters. When Susan was summoned again, Simmons placed the soil analysis report on the table. Susan initially stayed silent, then denied. Daniel often gardened, soil on his clothes was normal. But Simmons countered, "True, but why was he missing on the highway while his clothes carried your backyard soil? That only proves one thing: he never left the house alive." Susan didn't respond, her eyes downcast, hands clenched tightly. From a legal standpoint, this finding completed the case. Susan had a financial motive, the means to kill, and now a crime scene. Prosecutors concluded Daniel Harper was murdered in his own home during a blizzard, with his body moved to mislead the investigation. Over 20 years later, the small patch of backyard where vegetables grew and an old swing sat had inadvertently exposed the truth Susan tried to bury. From that moment, the Harper case was no longer just a notable Nebraska cold case, but an airtight indictment ready to bring the killer to justice. With the soil analysis confirming Daniel Harper was killed in his backyard and his body moved, the cold case unit and Hall County prosecutors decided to reconstruct the full timeline of the 2001 blizzard night. This was the final step before requesting an arrest warrant. Every detail, from witness statements, forensic reports, ballistics, and geological analysis, was pieced into a cohesive narrative. 9:45 p.m. The Johnsons hear loud arguing from the Harper house. 10 p.m. Alice Monroe, half a mile away, hears a bang in the storm, now confirmed as the .38 shot through Daniel's skull. 10:15 p.m. Truck driver Robert Miller sees the Ford Taurus with hazard lights on the Interstate 80 shoulder. It all fit perfectly. Daniel was shot at home. Susan drove the car with his body to the highway, staged the scene, and later reported the gun missing to cover her tracks. When the timeline was projected in the October 2021 meeting, no one doubted it. Lead prosecutor Margaret O'Connell nodded. It's time. We have motive, mean scene, and scientific evidence. The jury won't need long to decide. That afternoon, the arrest warrant for Susan Harper was signed. On October 18th, a joint task force with Grand Island Police acted. They avoided a spectacle, but the case had drawn too much attention. That morning, as Susan drove to the supermarket, 3 police cars blocked her at the State Street intersection. Red lights flashed, and a loudspeaker announced, "Susan Harper, you're under arrest for first-degree murder." Stunned, she let go of the wheel, stammering, "No, it can't be." Before a few curious neighbors, Susan was handcuffed and led from her car. The scene shocked Grand Island. The woman once seen as a victim of fate, who lived nearly 2 decades as a stoic widow, now walked in a police escort, her face pale, hair disheveled. In a brief press conference that afternoon, O'Connell declared, "We believe Susan Harper murdered her husband Daniel Harper on December 15, 2001, to benefit financially from his life insurance policy. Scientific evidence has revealed the truth." This case, once one of Nebraska's most prominent cold cases, now has a chance for justice to speak. Detective Simmons stood behind the podium, quietly observing. In her mind, she retraced the journey from soil on pant legs, a distorted bullet, to Susan's inconsistent statements. It all led to this moment, when a case forgotten for 20 years returned to the light. The Grand Island community reeled from the shock. Neighbors who once pitied Susan were now unsure what to believe. A former friend said on local TV, "I thought she was a victim. But maybe we lived next to a killer all these years." Susan Harper's arrest not only closed 2 decades of doubt, but opened a new chapter, the trial. But at that moment, as the police car door slammed shut behind the gray-haired woman, everyone knew the mystery of the 2001 blizzard night had finally been solved. After October 18, 2021, when Susan Harper was handcuffed and led from her Grand Island home, the Harper case became Nebraska's focal point. Local media ran headlines. "Wife in 2-decade cold case arrested for husband's murder." The state buzzed, but for Hall County prosecutors, the media storm was secondary. The real task was preparing for trial, proving to a jury that Susan Harper killed her husband on that 2001 blizzard night. Lead prosecutor Margaret O'Connell assembled a task force, with Detective Laura Simmons as a key witness. They built the case on 4 pillars: forensics, ballistics, crime scene soil, and financial motive. The first pillar was forensics. The 2021 report confirmed Daniel's skull had a clean bullet hole from a .38, with a right arm fracture showing he fought back before being shot. Forensic experts were ready to testify, presenting 3D reconstructions to show the jury this couldn't be an accident or suicide. The second pillar was ballistics. The FBI's Quantico report confirmed the bullet's rifling matched a Smith & Wesson .38 Susan had registered. The 1999 gun permit and 2002 lost firearm report would be key evidence, proving the murder weapon was in her possession. The third pillar was crime scene soil. Analysis showed soil on Daniel's pants matched the Harper backyard almost perfectly, not the highway shoulder where the car was found. This scientific evidence pinpointed the true crime scene. Daniel was shot at home. His body moved to stage a false scene. The final pillar was financial motive. Bank records showed Susan received a $250,000 life insurance payout in 2003 months after Daniel was declared missing. A note from the insurance company, her call inquiring about claim procedures right after the case closed, would demonstrate her calculated planning. In strategy meetings, O'Connell stressed, "We must not only prove Susan shot her husband, but tell a logical story that makes every piece fit for the jury." Simmons and other investigators were assigned as witnesses, recounting the case's reopening, from the paint on the Ford Taurus to the bone excavation, and Susan's contradictory statements. On the other side, Susan's court-appointed defense attorney prepared a counterattack, focusing on the evidence collection process. They planned to question how can we be sure Daniel's clothes weren't contaminated with soil from elsewhere over 20 years. Who guarantees the chain of custody wasn't broken? For the bullet, they would argue that soil exposure could distort rifling marks, making ballistics comparisons unreliable. On the financial front, they might claim receiving life insurance was legal, not proof of a murder motive. Simmons anticipated these challenges and, with forensic experts, spent weeks reviewing the evidence chain. Technicians confirmed soil, bullet, and bones were properly sealed, stored in evidence lockers with clear codes, and showed no signs of tampering. Every custody step was documented, ready for defense scrutiny. The FBI also committed to sending a technician to testify, affirming the ballistics comparison's reliability. Meanwhile, the prosecution also prepared an emotional element testimony from Daniel's two sons. They would tell the jury about growing up without a father and the shock of learning their mother was accused of his murder. Though the prosecution didn't rely solely on emotion, this human element would underscore the cruelty of the act. Susan Harper, through her lawyer, steadfastly denied the charges. She claimed she was framed, that someone stole the gun from her shed, killed Daniel, and set her up. Her lawyer emphasized, no direct witnesses, and all evidence is circumstantial. But Simmons knew the case didn't need a direct witness. The combination of the four pillars of scientific and financial evidence was strong enough to form a unified picture. As the trial date approached, pressure mounted, Nebraska media relentlessly covered the story, calling Harper the two-decade cold case heading to trial. The Grand Island community was divided. Some still believed Susan was innocent, others felt justice was near. During late-night preparations, Simmons often sat alone in her office, rereading reports, marking points the defense might attack. For her, the trial wasn't just about bringing Susan to justice, but also about giving Daniel Harper, the man swallowed by the 2001 blizzard and forgotten for nearly 2 decades, a voice again. When the formal indictment was announced, Susan Harper was charged with first-degree murder and tampering with a crime scene. The trial was set for early 2022. On the eve of its start, Nebraska held its breath. Would the truth of that blizzard night be fully revealed in the courtroom, where justice and deceit would face off directly? In February 2022, the Hall County courtroom was packed. Nebraska media arrived early, crowding the back rows to cover what was deemed the decade's most significant trial. Susan Harper, her hair now gray, wore a pale gray sweater and sat beside her defense attorney. Her face was stoic, but her hands gripped tightly. Lead prosecutor Margaret O'Connell stood, beginning her opening statement. She looked at the jury and started with a chilling line. "This isn't a disappearance in a blizzard, this is a calculated murder." O'Connell laid out the timeline of December 15, 2001, clearly. 9:45 p.m. Neighbors heard arguing from the Harper house, 10 p.m. A gunshot rang out, matching the bullet hole in Daniel's skull, 10:15 p.m. Daniel's Ford Taurus was seen on Interstate 80, hazard lights flashing. These events aren't disconnected, O'Connell stressed. They form a sequence showing Daniel was killed at home, and a fake scene was staged just 30 minutes later. Next, the prosecution moved to forensics. A forensic expert took the stand, detailing the skull's clean bullet hole, the M38 special bullet, and the right arm fracture proving a struggle. 3D images of the skull were projected, making many in the courtroom shudder. Then, the soil analysis was presented. Soil on Daniel's clothes matched the Harper backyard, not the highway. This was pivotal. The true crime scene was the home, not Interstate 80. When the prosecution shifted to motive, the room grew heavier. O'Connell pointed to financial records. In April 2003, Susan Harper received $250,000 in life insurance. Weeks later, she paid off her mortgage, freeing herself from the burden Daniel left. This isn't coincidence. This is motive. The jury sat silently, eyes fixed on bank records showing clear figures. The morning's highlight was the FBI ballistics expert's testimony. Dressed neatly in a suit, the Quantico technician explained how rifling marks on a gun barrel leave a unique fingerprint, The conclusion. The bullet matched a Smith & Wesson .38, the same model Susan registered. The chance this is a random coincidence is near zero, he told the court. After the prosecution's presentation, the defense attorney stood, opening with a firm tone. No direct witness saw Susan Harper fire a gun. Everything you've heard is a theory built on scattered pieces. The defense attacked the evidence collection process, questioning the forensic expert. The soil was stored for nearly 20 years. Who guarantees no contamination in the evidence locker? Weren't hundreds of samples stored there? The expert confirmed the chain of custody was intact, but the jury took notes, and the defense had planted a seed of doubt. Next, the defense challenged the ballistics. They asked the FBI expert, the bullet sat in soil for 20 years, exposed to weather and corrosion. Can you absolutely confirm the rifling marks weren't distorted? The expert admitted some distortion, but maintained the marks were clear enough for an accurate match. The defense turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, a single distortion could change everything. Can you convict someone based on a bullet rusted for 20 years? On the financial front, the defense argued, life insurance isn't a motive for murder. It's a legal right for a spouse when someone goes missing. You can't equate a payout with proof of a crime. They stressed that many Nebraskans have insurance, and a payout doesn't prove murder. The first day of trial ended with two contrasting narratives. The prosecution's cohesive story backed by forensics, ballistics, soil, and motive. The defense sowing doubt about evidence reliability after 20 years. While Susan sat stone-faced, media outside ran headlines. Prosecution lands heavy blows. Defense counters with reasonable doubt. And everyone knew the real battle had just begun. After weeks of intense arguments in the Hall County courtroom, the Susan Harper trial reached its final stage. The prosecution had meticulously built its case with forensics, ballistics, soil, and financial motive. The defense persistently sowed doubt, focusing on circumstantial evidence and a 20-year chain of custody. After both sides delivered closing arguments, the 12-person jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Susan sat motionless, hands trembling slightly on her lap, while Detective Laura Simmons, from the prosecution's bench, stared quietly at the wooden table, waiting. The jury deliberated for nearly 10 hours. Some members initially hesitated, noting no direct witness saw Susan fire the gun. But the FBI's ballistics report, the backyard soil match, and the $250,000 life insurance payout tipped the scales. If it wasn't her, one juror said, who else had the gun, the motive, and the opportunity that night? Finally, as the clock ticked into a new day, the jury reached a verdict. Susan Harper was guilty of second-degree murder and concealing a body. The next morning, the courtroom was packed as the jury returned. The clerk announced, "All rise." Judge Howard McMillan asked the fateful question. The jury foreman, a gray-haired man, stood and said firmly, "We, the jury, find the defendant Susan Harper guilty of second-degree murder and concealing a victim's body." A wave of murmurs swept through. Susan slumped back, eyes closed, whispering something to her lawyer. Prosecutor O'Connell exhaled, and Simmons felt a 20-year burden lift from her shoulders. The sentence was later pronounced 25 years for second-degree murder, plus 5 years for concealing a body, served concurrently. The judge emphasized, though this case spanned 2 decades and required modern technology to illuminate the evidence, justice never forgets. Your actions took a life and deceived a community. This sentence reflects the law's severity. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with live coverage. Grand Island neighbors expressed mixed emotions. Some felt relief that the truth was revealed. Others struggled to believe the woman they knew had hidden such a horrific crime. Daniel's 2 sons, now adults, sat silently in the courtroom. They didn't look at their mother during the verdict, only held each other's hands, tears streaming. For them, justice for their father meant permanently losing their mother. As Susan was led out, handcuffs gleaming, she said nothing. Once the community's grieving widow, She left the courtroom as a convicted murderer, confirmed by science and truth. Simmons watched, not triumphant, but with a cold sadness. She knew justice was served, but at the cost of a shattered family and 2 decades of community torment. The Harper case, officially closed, becoming a precedent in Nebraska's cold case history. A disappearance thought swallowed by a blizzard, ultimately solved by modern forensics, soil analysis, and ballistics. It proved that time may fade memories, but properly preserved evidence never lies. It also served as a reminder: justice may arrive late, but when it does, it resounds like thunder. Shaking Grand Island after nearly 20 years of waiting. Susan Harper's 25-year sentence closed a nearly 2-decade journey, but the case's ripples didn't stop at the Hall County courtroom. The next day, the Nebraska State Patrol held a press conference, announcing that the Harper case would be a case study in training new investigators. The state police chief declared, "This is clear proof that cold cases are never truly dead. Advancing technology, forensic techniques, and investigators' persistence can revive the truth, even if buried under snow for 20 years." Grand Island remained stunned. For many, the shock wasn't just that Daniel Harper was killed by his wife, but that the truth was concealed so skillfully for 2 decades. In roadside coffee shops, the 2001 blizzard night was retold as a collective ghost story. An elderly neighbor told a local reporter, "We pitied her, shared her tears. Now we know we pitied the wrong person." Nebraska media ran in-depth analyses, calling it a generational case. Major outlets highlighted forensics' role: the .38 bullet matching Susan's gun, backyard soil on Daniel's clothes, and the life insurance payout turning disappearance into motive. A local radio station aired a special interviewing Detective Laura Simmons. She shared, "I don't feel victorious. I'm relieved Daniel Harper got justice. But it's heartbreaking, because that justice means a family is completely broken." The Nebraska Police Academy immediately added the Harper case to its curriculum. First-year cadets studied how Simmons reopened the file in 2019, spotted gaps in statements, and used soil analysis, a rare tool in old cases. In one class, an instructor stressed, if Simmons hadn't patiently reread every report, the soil on Daniel's pant leg would still be a forgotten number in the 2001 file. Beyond professionals, the case impacted the community's psyche. Many in Grand Island felt a loss of trust, having shared sympathy with a murderer disguised as a victim for 20 years. Yet the verdict also restored faith in the legal system. The truth, though late, was uncovered. Daniel's sons, now in their 30s, issued a brief statement post-trial. "We lost our father in 2001, and now we've lost our mother. But at least we know the truth, and the truth is what we need to move forward." Their words marked the end of a tragedy and the start of a new chapter of healing and renewal. For Nebraska, the Harper case became a dual symbol: a community's pain and a testament to cold case investigation's power. In later conferences, Harper's name was mentioned alongside other notable U.S. cases. In Grand Island, where winter snow still blankets cornfields, the memory of the 2001 blizzard night lingers, a reminder that sometimes the killer isn't hiding in distant shadows, but in the seemingly peaceful house next door. The Daniel Harper case in Nebraska, spanning 2 decades and solved through persistence and forensic advancements, offers lessons for life in America today. First, it underscores the power of truth. Though buried in snow for nearly 20 years, soil on pant legs and a distorted bullet still spoke, ultimately exposing the killer. In practice, this shows law enforcement and communities shouldn't easily dismiss missing persons or cold cases, as new technology can open paths once thought closed. Second, it reveals a dark reality in American society: crime driven by financial gain. Susan Harper killed her husband for a $250,000 life insurance payout, a sum that transformed her economic life but could never justify taking a life. The lesson is that Americans, in a society valuing insurance and wealth, must stay vigilant against material temptation, and remember money can't offset moral or legal costs. Finally, the case highlights the importance of community and vigilance. Neighbors' accounts of arguing and a gunshot during the blizzard became critical when forensics reopened the file. In today's world, this encourages us to pay closer attention to our surroundings and not ignore unusual signs, as a single observation could save a life or bring justice. In other words, the 2001 Nebraska lesson reminds us that justice may arrive late, but it will come, if society, science, and community persist in seeking truth. Thank you for following this journey to unravel a Nebraska cold case buried in a blizzard for 2 decades. Subscribe to the channel to catch more true crime stories where justice, though delayed, rings out powerfully. See you in the next video.